He was 7 years old the first time he realized other dads showed up. Not his. There was a school play, a Thursday evening, 30 kids on a cafeteria stage in paper costumes. He had one line. He had practiced it 47 times in front of the bathroom mirror. He remembered counting. Every single other kid had someone in the audience with a camera. He had his mother, and the empty chair beside her. He delivered his line perfectly. Nobody cheered louder than she did, but he already knew, even at 7, that something was missing that no amount of applause could ever replace. This video's about what that absence actually does to a boy. Not the version therapists write about in academic papers, not the version politicians argue about at podiums, the version the men who lived it describe, when they finally stopped pretending everything was fine. 24 million children in the United States are growing up right now without a father in the home. 1 in every 3 kids. And before anyone turns this into a simple political argument, understand what we are actually talking about on a human level. We are talking about a boy who has no reference point for how a man handles pressure without destroying something. No blueprint for how a man expresses love without losing himself inside it. No template for what real discipline looks like. The kind that comes from someone who genuinely wants you to be stronger, not just quieter and easier to manage. No model for how a man sits with failure and gets back up without either collapsing or pretending it never happened. Pay attention to this. The absence of a father does not always look like destruction. Sometimes, often, it looks like a boy who became extraordinarily self-sufficient at an age wherein he should not have had to be. A boy who taught himself things, who figured it out alone in his room at night, who stopped asking for help early because there was simply nobody reliable to ask. That sounds like strength, and in certain ways it genuinely is. But here is what nobody tells you about boys who raise themselves. Marcus is 41. He grew up in Cincinnati, 3rd of 4 brothers, no father in the picture from age 3 onward. His mother worked 2 jobs. She was extraordinary. He will tell you that before anything else without hesitation, and he means every word of it. But he will also tell you this. He did not know how to sit in a room full of men without quietly scanning for threats. Not because he was aggressive, not because he was looking for a fight, because he had no reference point for male presence that felt genuinely safe. Every man who had moved through his childhood had eventually moved back out. So his nervous system made a perfectly logical conclusion from the available evidence. Men leave, men are temporary, men are either a source of danger or a source of absence. There is no third category. He carried that conclusion into his 20s without ever realizing it was operating in the background. Every male friendship felt like something he was already bracing to lose. Every mentor who showed interest felt like a setup. Every employer who tried to develop him felt like an adversary with a hidden agenda. He told us, "I spent 15 years sabotaging every good thing a man tried to do for me. I had no idea why. I just could not let it land. The moment something good was actually happening, I would find a way to end it first." That is not a character flaw. That is a nervous system doing exactly what it was designed and trained to do. Protecting him from a loss it was convinced was coming anyway. Here is the data. Not to alarm you, to show you that what these men experienced was real, measurable, and entirely consistent across millions of lives. Boys raised without fathers are significantly more likely to leave school early. They are more likely to struggle with emotional regulation well into adulthood. They are more likely to enter the criminal justice system, not because of any inherent deficiency, but because nobody ever showed them what healthy male authority actually looked like, so they found it somewhere else in a form that cost them everything. Research from Princeton University found that father absence has a stronger measurable impact on behavioral outcomes than household income level does. Read that again. Not poverty, presence. And here's the finding that consistently stops people when they hear it. Boys who grow up without fathers are far more likely to become men who do not know how to receive love. Not give it, receive it. They can sacrifice endlessly for other people. They can provide, show up, protect, push through exhaustion without complaint. They can give everything they have to the people around them. But someone genuinely trying to do something kind for them, someone caring about them with no agenda attached, that is where the wall appears. Because nobody ever demonstrated what safe male care actually looked like. Nobody modeled what it means for a man to be present without eventually leaving. So when something that feels like that begins to arrive, the system flags it as a threat before it can become a loss. Kevin is 53. His father left when he was 11. Not dramatically. There was no explosive final moment, no screaming argument that ended everything. He simply stopped coming around. The phone calls grew shorter. The visits grew further apart. And then one day, Kevin understood, with the quiet certainty that children understand things they cannot yet fully name, that there would not be another visit. He told us the worst part was never the leaving itself. The worst part was the explanation he built to make sense of it. Because when a father disappears, and nobody explains why, and nobody ever explains why, a boy constructs his own reason. And the reason a child builds is almost always identical, regardless of the circumstances. It was me. Something in me made him go. Something about who I am was not worth staying for. Kevin carried that conclusion for 22 years, through 2 marriages that collapsed partly because he kept choosing women who confirmed the premise. Through a career he self-destructed twice, both times at the exact moment things were going well enough to actually matter, because succeeding felt more dangerous than failing. Through a pattern of making himself invisible in every room he occupied, so nobody would look too closely and arrive at the same conclusion his father apparently had. Pay attention to this. Kevin was not broken. Kevin was not damaged beyond repair. Kevin was operating on a false premise that nobody had ever challenged directly. A child's explanation that had been running uncorrected through his entire adult life. The day someone finally looked at him and said, plainly and without softening it, "Your father's choices had absolutely nothing to do with your worth as a human being." Kevin was 44 years old. He wept for the first time since he was a child, not because those words fixed everything overnight, because they were the first time in 4 decades that anyone had aimed actual truth directly at the actual wound. Let us talk about what this costs in practical terms, not just emotional terms, concrete, daily, practical terms. A boy without a father typically has no one teaching him how to negotiate, how to want something, say so clearly, and hold his position without either backing down entirely or escalating into aggression. No one showing him how to disagree with another man without the whole thing becoming a confrontation about dominance. No one modelling how to ask for help without it feeling like an announcement of failure. No one demonstrating how to apologise without completely collapsing, how to set a limit without destroying a relationship, how to be wrong about something and survive it. So he develops in one of 2 directions. He overcompensates, becomes the man who cannot back down from anything, who reads every challenge as an attack, who mistakes aggression for strength because aggression was the only version of male power he ever witnessed up close. Or he undercompensates, becomes the man who cannot advocate for himself at all, who absorbs disrespect and mistreatment in silence because pushing back feels like a risk his nervous system refuses to authorize, who is endlessly accommodating to everyone around him and quietly furious about it for reasons he cannot fully explain. Neither version is who he was born to be. Both are intelligent adaptations to an environment that never provided him the raw material he actually needed. James is 37. He told us, "I spent my entire 20s being the most agreeable person in every single room. I genuinely thought that was just my personality, that I was naturally easygoing, naturally flexible, naturally supportive of everyone around me. It took me years to understand that I was not easygoing. I was terrified. My agreeableness was not a personality trait. It was a survival strategy I'd built at 9 years old and never uninstalled. The strategy worked exactly as designed. It kept him safe in a childhood that required careful management. It cost him 15 years of his adult life and 1 marriage before he understood what was actually operating." Now here is the section of this conversation that almost nobody reaches, because most discussions about boys raised without fathers stop at the damage. They document the statistics, describe the wounds, make the case for how serious this is, and then stop, as if the wound is the complete story, and as if these men are permanently defined by what was absent. They are not. Thomas is 48. He grew up without a father. His left before Thomas was born and they never met. He became a father himself at 26, and he told us that becoming a father was simultaneously the most terrifying and the most clarifying experience of his entire existence, because he had to construct from the ground up what most men receive as inheritance. He had to consciously decide, one question at a time, what does a present father actually look like? What does a man do with his anger when his child is watching? What does it sound like when a father disagrees with his son without making the son feel worthless? How do I stay in this room in this hard conversation when every instinct I was raised with is pointing toward the door? He said, "I treated fatherhood the way an engineer approaches a system he has never seen before. I read everything I could find. I sought out men I respected and asked them questions that probably made me look desperate. I watched how they talked to their kids. I paid attention to the small things, how they entered a room, how they handled it when something went wrong, how they showed up when they did not feel like it. I was building a map I had never been given." His son is 21 now. Thomas was at every school event, every athletic competition, every performance, every difficult conversation he would have preferred to avoid. Every moment his son needed a man to stay in the room. Thomas stayed in the room. He broke a generational pattern not because it was natural or easy, because he made a conscious decision and then honoured that decision every single day for 2 decades. without a blueprint, without a model, without anyone showing him how. That is not ordinary. That is one of the most demanding acts of deliberate reconstruction a human being can undertake. So what do you actually do with all of this? First, name the premise. If you grew up without a father, there is a conclusion somewhere inside your operating system that you built as a child and have been running on ever since. It is still active. Find it. Most of them take one of a few forms. I am too much for people to stay, or I am fundamentally not enough, or men leave eventually. That is simply what they do. Name it out loud. Write it down if you have to, because you cannot challenge a premise you have never consciously identified. Second, find the evidence that contradicts it. Not every man in your history left. There was someone, a coach who showed up consistently, a teacher who kept paying attention, an uncle who stayed in contact, a neighbor who treated you like you were worth his time. Find those data points. Your nervous system constructed a rule from incomplete evidence collected by a child. You now have access to the complete data set. Update the rule accordingly. Third, understand the shadow side of the self-sufficiency you built. The ability to need nothing from anyone is genuinely valuable in a crisis and in many professional environments. It is quietly catastrophic inside an intimate relationship. The person across from you who is trying to care about you is not a threat. They are not going to use your need against you. Learn to receive care deliberately, with intention. Even when every trained instinct tells you to deflect it, it will feel wrong at first. The discomfort is not a signal to stop, it is a signal that you are finally doing the necessary work. Fourth, if you are a father now, or if you will be, understand that what your child needs from you is not perfection. It is not grand gestures or extraordinary performances of devotion. It is consistency, presence that is reliable and predictable. A man who stays in the room when it gets difficult, who shows up not only for the good moments, but specifically for the hard ones. Your child does not need a version of you that never makes mistakes. Your child needs a version of you that stays. Fifth, and this is the most important one, so stay with it. The absence of your father was not a judgment on your worth. It was not a conclusion he reached about who you were or what you deserved. It was a failure of his readiness, his capacity, his choices, his limitations. You were a child. You did not cause it. You did not earn it. You deserved better than you received. Saying that directly, without softening or qualifying it, is not self-pity. It is not weakness. It is the most honest accounting you will ever run on your own history, and it is the only foundation from which anything real can actually be built. Eric is 62. He never met his father, not once in his entire life. For 40 years he described himself confidently and consistently as someone it simply did not affect. He was fine. He had figured everything out. He did not need that. He had built a life, built a career, built a family of his own, and he was fine. Then his grandson was born. He held that baby, this new life, this person who had no idea yet what the world was going to ask of him, and felt something crack open in him that had been sealed and locked for 60 years. He told us, I stood there holding him and I thought, nobody held me like this and then decided to stay. Nobody held me like this and made a decision that I was worth their entire life. And I felt something I'd not felt in 60 years. I got angry, not at my father, at myself, at the 40 years I'd spent performing contentment, at all the energy I had dedicated to convincing myself and everyone around me that it had not mattered. It had always mattered. It mattered when he was 7, and it mattered at 62, and it had mattered every year in between whether he acknowledged it or not. Saying that plainly is not the end of the story. It is where the honest story finally begins. Marcus rebuilt his capacity to trust men. It took 8 years of deliberate, uncomfortable, often discouraging work. He now has 3 male friendships he describes as the most significant relationships in his life. Kevin stopped the self-sabotage at 44 the moment someone named the wound with precision. He has been building forward ever since. Thomas showed up for his son every single day for 21 years and created from nothing something that will outlast him. Eric held his grandson and finally gave himself permission to stop performing. None of them had a map. Every one of them built something anyway. You're not the empty chair in the audience. You are the man standing at the edge of the stage, deciding right now what you're going to do with everything you were never given. Drop your age in the comments. Tell me, what did you build that nobody showed you how to build? I read every single one. Subscribe if this video reached something real in you. New videos every week for men who are doing the work. See you in the next one.